"Marry me and I'll feed your boy," the rancher said, his voice steady as the crowd at the auction turned to stare. Eliza froze, clutching her son's thin shoulder, the heat of humiliation rushing to her cheeks. She'd been standing on the platform for 10 minutes while men shouted numbers at the auctioneer, treating her and Samuel like livestock. Most of them were just here for sport, but one bidder, Jonas Creel, was here to win. His smile was cruel, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Creel had just offered $50, the auctioneer already calling it a steal, when the voice came from the back. The man who spoke was tall, broad-shouldered, dust on his hat, and a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. He stepped forward slowly, the crowd parting to make way. "You heard me," he said again, eyes locked on Eliza. "Marry me, and your boy eats tonight, and every night after." Creel barked a laugh. $3 for a woman and a brat? You can't even keep your own place up, Tanner." The rancher, Tanner, ignored him. "You decide," he told Eliza. Her mind spun. She didn't know this man, didn't even know his first name until a moment ago, and marriage was no small thing. But Samuel's small hand was gripping hers so tightly his knuckles were white, his face pale with hunger. "Do I have your answer?" Tanner asked quietly, as the auctioneer's voice faltered under the tension. She hesitated only long enough to glance at Creel and see the hunger in his gaze. "Yes," she said, her voice low but firm. "Yes, I'll marry you." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Tanner stepped up to the platform, pulling $3 silver from his pocket and placing them in the auctioneer's palm. The rope looped around her wrist was cut, and Tanner offered his hand to help her down. She took it, unsteady on her feet but standing straight. Creel's smile had vanished, replaced by a glint of cold anger. "You'll regret this, Tanner," he muttered, loud enough for them both to hear. Tanner didn't respond. He led her and Samuel through the crowd, past whispers and sidelong looks, toward a waiting horse hitched to a small wagon. He lifted Samuel in first, then offered Eliza a steady hand. "You made the right choice," he said quietly, and though his tone was calm, there was something in his eyes that told her this bargain was about more than food. Tanner flicked the reins, the wagon rolling away from the auction block as the murmurs of the crowd faded behind them. Eliza sat stiff beside him. Samuel pressed close against her side. The boy clutched the crust of bread Tanner had handed him, nibbling cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish. She wanted to thank the rancher, but the words tangled in her throat. Marriage to a stranger wasn't gratitude. It was survival. Tanner didn't speak until they were clear of town. "You think I did this out of kindness?" His tone wasn't harsh, but it was steady, almost testing her. She kept her eyes ahead. "You didn't have to do it at all." "I had to," he said, "because Jonas Creel doesn't stop once he sets his sights. If I hadn't stepped in, you'd already be in his wagon, and he's not the kind to keep you breathing long." Eliza's stomach turned. "You know him?" "Knew his father? Rode fence for him before I had my own spread. Learned quick what kind of men they are." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "Creel wanted more than to win you. He wanted to humiliate you. And me." She frowned. "You?" Tanner nodded. "We've crossed before. I cut him out of a cattle contract last year, and he's been looking for a way to settle it." Samuel looked up from his bread. He wouldn't have fed us, would he?" Tanner's voice softened. "No, son, not for long." They rode in silence for a while, the road narrowing as it wound between stands of pine. When the cabin came into view, a modest, sturdy place with smoke curling from the chimney, Eliza felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Tanner pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is yours now," he said. "Ours." She stepped down, helping Samuel out, but her mind was still on the man they'd left behind. "If Creel hates you, won't he come here?" Tanner's jaw flexed. "He will. And he'll bring friends. That's why we make this official fast." Eliza stiffened. "You mean a real marriage?" "By law and by the church," Tanner said simply. "It's the only way you stay out of his reach. A married woman is harder to take without consequence, even for a man like Creel." She studied him, trying to read the truth in his face. Tanner's gaze didn't waver. "You don't have to trust me yet," he said, "but trust that I won't let him have you." Somewhere in the distance, faint but clear, came the sound of a single horse on the road. Too far for sight, close enough for her heart to start pounding again. The sound of the approaching horse grew louder, each hoofbeat sharp against the frozen ground. Tanner's eyes flicked toward the ridge, calculating distance. "Inside," he said quietly. Eliza ushered Samuel into the cabin, the boy clutching her skirts as if the walls themselves could protect him. Tanner stepped in behind them, shutting the door softly and taking down the rifle from the hooks above the hearth. "Don't speak unless I tell you," he murmured. Through the small front window, Eliza saw him, a lone rider in a black coat, reins slack in one hand, the other resting casually on his hip. Jonas Creel sat his saddle like a man who believed every inch of the world belonged to him. He swung down, snow crunching under his boots, and strode to the porch. His knock was slow, deliberate. "You've made a mistake, Tanner," Creel called, voice smooth as oil. "That woman and her brat, they're mine. I paid more, fair and square." Tanner didn't move from the window. "Auction's over, Creel. You lost." Creel's chuckle was low, dangerous. "You think a piece of paper from some preacher will stop me? I've taken better from stronger men than you." Eliza's fingers tightened on Samuel's shoulder. "He knows," she whispered. Tanner's eyes were steady on the door. "Let him talk." Creel's tone sharpened. "You've got until tomorrow to bring her to my ranch. If she's not there, I come back, with every man I can buy." He stepped closer, boots thudding on the porch. "And I'll take more than just her." Tanner's rifle rose slightly, the movement controlled but unmistakable. "Then you'd better bring a wagon for your own body," he said. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Creel's smile returned, colder now. "You always did have a mouth on you, Tanner. We'll see if it's still talking when I come back." He turned, walking back to his horse without haste, mounting in one smooth motion. As he rode off, his voice carried on the still air. "Tomorrow." The hoofbeats faded, but the tension in the cabin didn't. Tanner lowered the rifle and looked at Eliza. "We've got one night to be ready." Samuel's voice was small. "Ready for what?" Tanner's reply was quiet, but sure. "For the kind of trouble you can't run from." He set the rifle on the table, then glanced at Eliza. "Lock the door. I'll take first watch." Tanner moved with a steady purpose, checking the hinges on the doors, nailing a loose shutter, and laying a fresh stack of firewood near the hearth. Eliza followed him with her eyes, holding Samuel close on the bench. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Prepared for someone to come after you." Tanner didn't look up from where he was pouring cartridges into a leather pouch. "Not the first time a man's wanted what's mine." She bristled at the phrasing, but he caught her glance. "I mean the land, the herd, my people. That includes you now." Samuel tilted his head. "Even me?" Tanner gave the boy a quick nod. "Especially you." He crossed to the back wall and slid a heavy trunk from under the bed. Inside were more rounds, a coil of rope, and 2 revolvers wrapped in oiled cloth. He handed one to Eliza. "Ever shoot?" She shook her head. "Then stay inside. Aim for the middle if you have to use it, and don't waste bullets." He took her outside into the cold for a moment, showing her the cleared paths between the cabin and the small barn. "If things turn bad, you take Samuel and run there. Bolt it from the inside. I'll hold them here." Eliza looked toward the tree line, the shadows already deepening as dusk crept in. "You think he'll come tonight instead of tomorrow?" "Creel's a snake," Tanner said. "He strikes when you're not ready. So we'll be ready now." Back inside, he lit only a single lamp, keeping the rest of the cabin dim. "Light draws bullets," he explained. The older boards groaned in the wind, and Samuel jumped at every sound. Eliza found herself kneeling beside him, whispering stories from when he was small, trying to keep his mind anywhere but the danger pressing in. Tanner stood at the window, his shape a dark silhouette against the pale snow beyond. Hours passed, the fire burning low, until the faint sound of horses drifted through the night. Tanner lifted a hand, signaling for silence. 3 silhouettes moved at the edge of the pines, not Creel's full force, but scouts. One pointed towards the cabin, and the others split into the trees. Tanner's voice was low but certain. "He's here early." He chambered a round in the rifle, the sound loud in the stillness. "Stay down. Keep Samuel close." Eliza's heartbeat thudded in her ears as she reached for the revolver. Somewhere out there, Creel was already setting his pieces in place. The first sound came from the back of the cabin, a faint scrape against the wall, like a boot sliding on ice. Tanner moved without a word, slipping into the shadow by the rear window. Eliza crouched low beside the hearth, pulling Samuel close under the blanket. A sudden flash lit the night as a rifle fired from the tree line, the bullet punching into the logs with a dull, splintering thud. Samuel jumped, but Tanner didn't flinch. He waited, eyes narrowing, then eased the barrel of his rifle into the gap between shutters. One shot cracked through the cold air. A cry answered from the dark, followed by the sound of someone stumbling hard into the snow. The other scouts fired back, the sharp reports echoing through the still night. Tanner ducked, the glass in the window shattering above his shoulder. "Stay low," he barked, already moving toward the front. Eliza could see him counting under his breath, timing the shots. When the firing paused, he swung the door open a fraction, aimed, and sent another round into the shadows. Silence, then the sound of retreating boots crunching through the snow. Tanner stepped back inside, shutting the door softly. "Two down," he said, his voice calm but tight. "They'll crawl back to Creel and tell him we're awake." Samuel's eyes were wide. "Will he come now?" Tanner shook his head. "Number he'll wait until morning, when he can see and when his numbers count for more." He set the rifle on the table and began reloading, each cartridge sliding home with deliberate care. "That means we've got a few hours to make it harder for him." Eliza found her voice. "Harder how?" "Traps," Tanner replied simply. "Barriers, and making sure they can't set fire to this place without getting burned themselves." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think you can help?" She straightened. "You kept us from Creel once already. I'm not going to sit by and watch him take everything." Tanner gave a short nod, as if he'd expected that answer. "Then let's get to it." Outside, the snow was ankle-deep, muffling their movements as they dragged heavy logs to block the approach from the rear. Tanner strung wire between trees, setting it low where a horse's legs might tangle. The cold bit into Eliza's hands, but she worked without complaint, her breath clouding the air. When they finally stepped back into the cabin, the horizon was paling. Dawn was coming. and with it, Creel. The sun broke over the ridge in a thin, pale strip, spilling light across the frozen clearing. Eliza stood at the window, Samuel pressed against her side, his breath fogging the glass. The traps Tanner had set in the dark were now just faint lines and shadows in the snow. She could only hope they would work. The distant drum of hoofbeats carried through the still air, slow and steady at first, then growing louder until the sound filled the valley. Tanner was already outside, standing at the edge of the porch with his rifle slung in his hands, eyes fixed on the tree line. The first riders appeared. 2, then 4, then more, fanning out as they reached the open ground. By the time the last of them came into view, Eliza counted at least a dozen men. At their center rode Creel, his red scarf bright against the frost, his grin sharp as a knife. He reined in just short of the traps, scanning the cabin with a predator's patience. "Morning, Tanner," Creel called, his voice carrying easily. "I brought some friends. Figured you wouldn't hand her over without a little persuasion." Tanner didn't answer. He stood calm, but Eliza could see the way his shoulders had tightened, the weight of the moment settling on him. Creel leaned forward in the saddle. "One more chance. Send her out, and we all go home." Tanner's voice was even. "She's not yours, Creel, and she never will be." Laughter rippled through the riders, but Creel's eyes stayed locked on Tanner. "Then you've picked the day you die." He waved his arm, and the men began to spread out, circling the cabin like wolves. Tanner stepped back inside, closing the door with deliberate calm. "Positions," he told the warriors who had moved quietly into the corners of the room. "They'll test the back first. Be ready." Eliza could feel her heart pounding, each beat louder than the next. Samuel's small hand found hers, his grip tight. Outside, the crunch of boots and the jingle of tack grew closer. Then the first shot rang out, sharp and sudden. It slammed into the cabin wall, the sound echoing through the room. Tanner moved to the window, returned fire, and a rider pitched from his horse into the snow. Shouts erupted, horses rearing. The siege had begun. The wire Tanner had strung low between the trees snapped taut with a sharp twang as the first horse blundered into it. The animal screamed, pitching its rider head first into the snow. 2 more riders swerved wide, only to hit the downed logs blocking the approach from the rear. Shouts rang through the clearing, Creel barking orders to push harder. Gunfire cracked from the tree line, splinters flying off the cabin walls. Tanner fired from the front window, dropping a man who had broken cover to reload. "They'll try both sides now," he warned, already shifting to the rear. Eliza crouched low by the hearth, revolver in her hands, Samuel tucked behind her. The older Lakota warrior took up a position at the back door, his face set in grim focus. From the corner of her eye, Eliza saw movement, a rider slipping through a gap on the left, using the barn for cover. "Tanner!" she called, pointing. He pivoted, raising the rifle, but before he could fire, another man burst from the opposite side, charging the porch steps with a shotgun. The younger warrior met him head-on, slamming into him so hard the weapon flew into the snow. They grappled, boots churning up frost, until Tanner's rifle barked once and the attacker went still. The man near the barn made his move, sprinting low toward the rear of the cabin. Eliza's pulse hammered. Without thinking, she swung the revolver up, sighting on the broad shape in the snow. The crack of the shot jolted her arm, and the man dropped face first, his legs twitching once before going still. For a moment, the world seemed silent except for her own breathing. Then Creel's voice roared from the tree line, full of fury. "Burn it! If they won't come out, we'll smoke 'em out!" A rider broke from cover with a torch, the fire's glow bright against the pale morning. Tanner fired, missing by inches as the man ducked behind a stump. The torch's flame flared higher. "Eliza, the bucket!" Tanner shouted. She grabbed it, dashed to the barrel outside, and plunged it into the icy water, her fingers numbing instantly. The younger warrior was already moving to cover her, his rifle cracking twice at the torchbearer. The man stumbled, fell, and the torch hissed into the snow. Creel cursed, signaling his men to pull back toward the tree line. Tanner's eyes narrowed. He's not done. He's regrouping. Eliza's hands trembled as she set the bucket down, but the fear was no longer hollow. It was edged with something fiercer. Then so are we. The pause in the fight was brief, just long enough for the steam of horse breath to fade into the trees. Creel's voice rose again, sharp as a whip crack. "Hit 'em from both sides. Don't stop until the walls come down." Hooves thundered as riders surged forward in two waves, snow spraying from under pounding legs. Tanner braced at the front window, firing fast and precise, each shot dropping or turning a rider before they reached the porch. The younger warrior took the right flank, cutting down two men trying to slip through the pines. But Creel's numbers pushed hard, filling every gap. One rider burst through the traps, his horse stumbling but still carrying him close enough to leap off into the snow. He crashed against the front wall, trying to pry the shutter open. Eliza swung the revolver toward him and fired. The shot clipped his shoulder, spinning him into the drift. Before he could recover, the older warrior stepped outside, delivering a single, silent blow that left him still. At the back, shouts erupted as another group closed in. Gunfire rattled against the logs, one bullet tearing through the corner and splintering the chair beside Samuel. Eliza yanked him lower, shielding him with her body. Tanner called over his shoulder, voice clipped. "Stay with him, no matter what." Then Creel himself came into view, riding hard around the left side, his revolver spitting fire toward the front door. Tanner ducked just as a bullet ripped through the frame above his head. Without breaking stride, Creel dismounted, advancing on foot with two men close behind. The younger warrior moved to intercept, but a wild shot from one of Creel's men forced him into cover. Tanner stepped into the open, rifle leveled at Creel. "Last chance to ride out," Creel grinned, teeth white in the cold air. "Not without her." They moved almost together, Creel firing, Tanner's shot answering in the same heartbeat. The blast from Tanner's rifle tore Creel's hat from his head, but he kept coming, closing the gap. One of his men lunged for the porch, only to meet Eliza's shot square in the chest. The man collapsed, his revolver dropping into the snow. Creel stopped just short of the steps, his breath ragged, eyes burning into Tanner's. "I'll end you for this," he hissed. Tanner's voice was low, certain. "You won't get the chance." But Creel only backed away, retreating toward the trees as his men dragged the wounded back. The retreat wasn't surrender. It was the eye of a storm that was far from over. The forest swallowed Creel and his men for only minutes before the sound came again. Hooves pounding, voices shouting, the sharp clang of rifles striking stirrups. Tanner knew this would be it. "They're coming all at once," he said, his voice tight but steady. "Hold until they break." The warriors took their positions without a word, the younger one reloading with quick, sure hands, the older posting at the back with his rifle trained on the tree line. Eliza crouched near the hearth with Samuel, revolver ready, her palms slick with sweat despite the cold. Creel's charge hit like a wave, riders bursting from both flanks, snow flying under pounding hooves. The traps were trampled now, the logs pushed aside, leaving nothing between them and the cabin but open ground. Tanner's rifle roared, dropping one man mid-stride. The younger warrior took another, but still they came. A rider vaulted from his saddle onto the porch, kicking the door wide. Eliza fired without thinking, the shot deafening in the small space. The man crumpled at the threshold, his pistol skittering across the floor. Two more tried to force the back, but the older warrior's fire drove them back into the snow. Creel himself appeared at the front, revolver blazing, a snarl on his face. Tanner met him in the doorway, their shots so close they blended into one thunderous crack. Tanner's bullet ripped through Creel's coat, staggering him, but he stayed on his feet, lunging forward to grab the rifle barrel. The two men fought in the doorway, boots slipping on the icy boards. Eliza wanted to move, but Samuel clung to her, his eyes wide with fear. The younger warrior saw the struggle, darted forward, and slammed his shoulder into Creel, forcing him back into the snow. Tanner followed, wrenching the rifle free and leveling it at Creel's chest. "End it," the younger warrior urged. Creel's eyes burned with hate, his breath ragged clouds in the freezing air. Tanner's finger hovered on the trigger, and then he lowered the rifle. "Get off my land," he said, his voice cold enough to cut. "Next time I bury you here." Creel's jaw tightened, but he backed away, signaling to the few men still standing. They retreated into the trees, their shapes swallowed by the shadows until the clearing lay quiet again. Tanner stood on the porch, watching until the last hoofbeat faded. Only then did he lower the rifle fully, his shoulders easing just a fraction. Inside, Eliza let out a shaky breath, the revolver still warm in her hands. She knew this wasn't just Tanner's victory. It was theirs. The snow was still falling when the last trace of Creel's men vanished into the pines. Tanner shut the door and leaned the rifle against the wall, the tension in his frame finally loosening. Eliza stood by the hearth, Samuel tucked safely under her arm, both of them watching him as if waiting for the next blow to fall. But the fight was over. For now. Tanner crossed the room and crouched to meet Samuel's eyes. "You did good, staying close to your ma," he said, voice softer than Eliza had yet heard it. Samuel nodded solemnly, still gripping the crust of bread he'd refused to let go. Tanner straightened, meeting Eliza's gaze. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "You never did. This was about keeping Creel from taking something that was never his." Eliza's throat tightened. "I said yes because I thought it was only about food for my boy. I didn't expect—" She trailed off, unable to name the strange safety she'd felt even in the middle of gunfire. Tanner's eyes softened, though his voice stayed quiet. "It was never just a bargain to me. Not after I saw you stand your ground at that auction." He reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. "Marriage license. I meant to get the preacher this morning, but Creel came first. We'll do it proper now, if you still want to." Eliza stared at the paper, then at him. The man who'd bought her with $3 silver now offered her the choice to stay or walk away. Samuel looked up at her, his small hand slipping into hers. "I want to stay, Ma," he whispered. The answer came easier than she expected. "Then we stay." Tanner's mouth curved, just slightly, before he moved to stoke the fire. "We'll need to fix that front shutter and patch the back wall before nightfall," he said. "Creel might be licking his wounds, but he's not the sort to forget." Eliza stepped closer, the warmth from the fire brushing her face. "We'll be ready. This is our home now." He glanced at her, and for the first time, there was no guarded distance in his eyes, only the steady recognition of someone he could trust, and who trusted him in return. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the scars of the morning's fight. Inside, the three of them stood together, no longer strangers bound by necessity, but something stronger, something worth defending, no matter the cost.